The story surrounding the search for and recovery of Air France 447 is one of hope, frustration, disappointment and despair, finally culminating after more than 2 years in bittersweet success. More than 2 years of persistence, which ultimately forced the deep waters of the Atlantic to finally surrender their secrets.
This is Le Bourget Airport. Under close guard, the 2 black boxes of the Rio-Paris flight are ushered into the offices of the BEA, the Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis, the French Civil Aviation Authority. The boxes have just been recovered from a depth of 3,900 meters and are ready to reveal their secrets. 23 months after flight AF 447 crashed in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. For 2 years now, the world has been wondering what caused this accident. 2 years during which the families of the 228 victims have been desperate to find out what happened to their loved ones. 2 years during which investigators have tirelessly pursued what's already one of the biggest inquiries in the history of aviation. For the first time, using previously unseen footage, we are going to tell you about their search in the ocean depths. May 31st, 2009, 10:29 p.m. Flight AF 447 takes off for Paris. At 2:10 a.m., it reports its position for the last time, then vanishes in a communication dead zone. Within a few hours, the missing flight becomes headline news all over the world.
What's hard to grasp is the word vanished. How can a 21st century aircraft just vanish? Nighttime, the middle of the ocean, no witnesses, just disappear without a trace.
Very quickly, the French Navy and Air Force deploy considerable resources in the zone. An international coalition begins to form around France, involving Brazil and the United States. Military frigates and nuclear submarines are sent in. At this stage, the passengers' families have not given up hope.
I didn't cry at all for the first week, figuring that until it had been confirmed otherwise, there was a chance they were still alive. Someone in our family said, Alexander is a good swimmer, so is Julia. Maybe they survived. Those are the kind of irrational thoughts you have in that situation.
In the days following the disappearance, the Brazilians find the tail fin of the AF 447, as well as pieces of debris. In total, 1,000 pieces are found floating on the surface, amounting to approximately 5% of the aircraft. These clues make one thing certain: no passengers can possibly have survived. Among the floating debris, 50 bodies are found. They are repatriated and identified. But where are the other 178 victims? Where is the wreckage of the plane?
We figured that since they'd found the aircraft, they'd find people's remains too. But no. Parts were found, people too, but they didn't find the plane.
In the days following the accident, the investigation is taken up by the Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis, the BEA. It was in these offices that investigators mapped out their strategy. Their prime objective was to find the black box flight recorders containing the secrets of what happened.
By understanding this accident and its causes, could we prevent other similar accidents? Are there other aircraft flying right now liable to suffer, maybe not an identical, but a similar accident?
What happened to this Airbus A330? A technical breakdown? A handling error? Faced with such uncertainties, something had to be done.
Planes shouldn't fall out of the sky, and no one knows why or where it is. Too many people fly every single day. The rumors, of course, were it was a bomb, it was terrorism, and until you find out, everybody is more at risk because you don't know, is there a problem with the plane? Is there a failure in maintenance or something? Nobody knows until you find out exactly what happened.
What exactly was it that cost the lives of 228 passengers and crew? Where were they now, in the vastness of the Atlantic? Although there was little to work on, the investigators kept their cool. They focused on the aircraft's last known position. From that point, they traced a radius of 75 kilometers. This was the designated search area. Cliffs, mountain peaks, flatlands. The uneven topography beneath the water makes it one of the most mysterious, most hostile areas of the Earth's surface.
It was like trying to find a single piece in an area the size of Switzerland, or a large part of Switzerland. We were looking for a needle in a haystack.
The BEA launched the first phase of its investigation with a degree of optimism. They were looking for the signals transmitted by the black boxes. To that end, the French Navy submarine, the Emeraude, was deployed to comb the area. The BEA also called into action two ships, the Fairmount Glacier and the Fairmount Expedition. These two vessels boast unique hydrophonic technology for sounding out the seabed. The objective was to pick up the locator beacon transmitted by the aircraft's black boxes. In aviation terminology, these are known as pingers. Once underwater, they send out an ultrasound signal every second. But in a vast ocean, detecting these pingers is a huge challenge. First, the beacon needs to have survived the impact of the accident. Then it has to be found within the 30 to 40-day period during which the signal is transmitted.
It had to be found. It just had to be. We had no choice. We had just 30 days, and we had the best possible onboard resources at our disposal.
To coordinate this armada of hardware, the BEA also chartered an immense ship, the Pourquoi Pas. The hunt for the black boxes has been going on for almost a month. The investigators worked tirelessly, but they had only a few days left to pick up the sound of the pinger.
Okay, we'll go back up towards point 63.
We're now at 2,500 meters.
Despite their concerns, the teams met up each day around mission coordinator Frédéric Hervelin.
We kept on believing we were in the right zone. We knew that potentially the pingers would keep transmitting, so we couldn't give up.
Apparent wind speed 13 knots.
The investigators reached their deadline date. In theory, the pingers were no longer transmitting. They were now undetectable. To sum up this early campaign, for a month, the zone was explored by American hydrophones. In BEA jargon, it had been blanchi, or cleared. The wreckage must be somewhere else. Before returning, the crew of the Pourquoi Pas gathered on deck. A strange ceremony unfolded around Captain Philippe Guillemet. He decided to symbolically address the 228 victims of the Rio-Paris flight.
As our mission moves on to the next stage, I'd like to say one last farewell in the name of all the sailors aboard the Pourquoi Pas. I want you to know that we aboard the Pourquoi Pas have all done our utmost in our attempts to solve the mystery of the tragedy that took away your lives.
Meanwhile, the lack of progress began to arouse suspicion among the victims' relatives regarding the integrity of the investigation. Questions were asked. Were the BEA, Airbus, and Air France dragging their feet in an accident investigation that may incriminate them?
There was the feeling that maybe they were trying to hide things from people. A great deal of suspicion arose around the idea that there was too much at stake. That the airline and aircraft constructor were being deliberately secretive.
The question was, were they really looking or just pretending? So they could claim to have done what they needed to, but failed to find anything.
Imagining that the BEA didn't want to find the truth was like thinking a doctor doesn't want to cure you. Would I really sully 30 years of my career for short-term petty interests?
Despite the failure of the initial phase, despite the rumors, the BEA wasn't about to give up. Since they could no longer count on the pingers, some new hardware was towed in. High-resolution sonar equipment designed for geological study of the seabed. The sonar was towed by a cable several kilometers long. Every nook and cranny of the seabed had to be analyzed to discover where the aircraft wreckage was lurking. But after 22 days of searching, there was still no trace of AF447. At a cost of around 9 million euros, almost zero headway had been made. During this second phase, only this small rectangle had been cleared. With the momentum now against the BEA, new director Jean-Paul Troidec was convinced that to systematically explore the entire crash zone would be too costly and take far too much time. In order to more accurately target their next move, the BEA called in the world's top researchers in the field of ocean currents. Starting from the point where debris was found after the accident, these scientists calculated the direction of drift in order to pinpoint the site of the wreckage. All calculations pointed to this 2,000 square kilometer area northwest of the crash zone. This is where the wreckage of AF447 ought to be.
The interesting thing was several scientists from different countries using different models all seemed to point in the same direction. So that was pretty convincing.
The port of Recife in Brazil, 9 months after the accident. 2 ships chartered by the BEA, the Seabed Worker and the Anne Candy's weigh anchor. Paul-Henri Nargiolet was handed the reins for this new campaign. His previous experience involved exploring the Titanic. Once in the area, the crew of the Seabed Worker began to set up their new machine. This was the Ramus, an autonomous underwater vehicle that would make research much more efficient.
It's an almost surgical piece of equipment, capable of very precise work, with the advantage of being very fast. Most of all, you can send it down to a certain depth, and it will stay there and get to work.
Once on the seabed, the Ramus started its sonar scans. It works like an underwater drone. Adapting to the relief, it sounds out the depths with surgical precision. Once near the seabed, its camera is triggered. This gives the crew on the surface visual contact with the seabed. While the BEA search was at a dead end, in the zone identified by scientists, some astonishing news was breaking. The Ministry of Defense made an announcement.
Good evening, everyone. In tonight's news, people were beginning to lose faith, but the French Navy has made significant progress in the hunt for the Rio-Paris black boxes.
According to the Ministry of Defense, the signal sent out by one of the flight recorders was apparently picked up by French submarine the Emeraude.
To their very great surprise, the investigators realized that the Emeraude had recorded the sound of pingers a year earlier, during the first stages of the search. The signals were not heard at the time. Analysis of the submarine's recordings a year later isolated the sound of the flight recorder's pinger. The BEA's director called a press conference. The families and journalists were baffled. In truth, so was he.
I would like to caution against jumping to any conclusions. First, we have not yet located the wreckage. We think there's a good chance it's there, but our misplaced optimism in the past means we cannot say with any degree of certainty.
We were totally baffled. Everything seemed to go wrong, and we didn't know which way to turn to understand the situation.
The crew of the seabed worker had a decision to make. Should they head for the zone identified by the ministry, several days sail away?
Troadec said, "What do you think? Shall we go or not?" I said we had no choice. We had to head up there. If they said they'd found something, we had to go see.
Paul-Henri Nargeolet gave orders to head southwest. The seabed worker thus set off for the other side of the search zone, following up the ministry's lead. The AF-447 black boxes and their secrets were apparently right there. After a few hours, the first pictures were in. No trace of debris. No trace of the black boxes detected by the submarine. On the third day, a conference call was held with the BEA in Paris. Olivier Ferrand had some news.
Hello? We'd like to inform you. Of the latest developments. Are you sitting down?
Sure, we're sitting down.
It's very likely that the submarine recorded sounds coming from within the vessel itself. Probably an operator was familiarizing himself with the sound of pingers. It's what we feared, and it seems to be the case.
Incredible, but true. When the BEA examined the recording, they discovered that the signal had come from within the vessel itself, not from outside. Very probably a case of sailors on board listening to recordings of pingers so they could learn how to detect them. Basically, the ministry believed the mystery had been solved, but it was a case of misinterpretation.
At one point, some information was received, and they said, "We have a sound, it seems to match." But in fact, it didn't at all. So for the family, it was another slap in the face. You think, they're just amateurs.
On the seabed worker, the atmosphere was heated. A week had just been wasted in the wake of a horrendous mistake. Around 21 million euros had been spent over the 3 initial phases.
Perfect shot. Okay, slow and steady with that now, because you're hooked up to the line. Yeah, just a little longer. Then we're just gonna throw it when he's got most of it gone. You can let that go.
At the BEA, frustration was spilling over. What if the zone identified by scientists wasn't the right one? The sea currents model had determined the search zone for phase 3. What if the calculations were flawed? At a meeting, Jean-Paul Troadec and Olivier Ferrand realized their strategy needed to be reassessed. They decided to use concrete evidence and see in situ how the sea currents actually worked. To that end, the BEA dropped buoys equipped with GPS into the zone to analyze their drift. 2 weeks later, the results were astonishing. Each buoy seemed to take a completely unpredictable trajectory. The unavoidable conclusion was that in this area of the Atlantic, sea currents are completely random. On the ground, the calculations that had directed the search for several weeks were worthless.
Now it's tempting to think that experts at that level could have said, you know, in that zone it's completely random. Making retro-drift calculations is pretty much impossible. I'll say no more.
1 year to the day after the accident, the victims' families called their own press conference. After all the disappointments, U-turns, and dashed hopes, the wrangle with the BEA had become poisonous. Were the investigators at the mercy of politicians and industrialists? The lawyer acting on behalf of the victims' families expressed his outrage.
We are forced to wonder whether there is an agenda here, inasmuch as victims' families are being treated with contempt. Once again, we are told nothing. All our information comes through you. It's just unreal.
Desperation set in. We'd had enough. But you still have to get up in the morning, go to work, get on with your life. We were pretty sure that the BEA hadn't done everything within their power. To us, the strategy was all wrong, and we made no bones about it.
After a long 10-month interruption, the search resumed. Jean-Paul Troadec, director of the BEA, had managed to obtain more funding from Airbus and Air France to launch a 4th campaign. A press conference was called at the Ministry of Ecology and Transportation.
After phase 3, we are more confident than ever that we can work in these terrains, and that the strategy that we have developed to look at every place twice at least, we have a confidence that if the aircraft is in this area, we will be able to identify the wreckage. I want to emphasize that none of this is easy, none of this is routine. Working at the at these depths in the ocean, again, is at the very cutting edge of research and exploration on the planet.
Starting out from the Suape port in Brazil, Phase 4 got underway. The ship heading this new operation was the Alucia. The objective was to search around the last known position of the plane and then explore the whole of the circled area, come what may. It was basically a return to square one, exploring zones that had already been cleared, maybe erroneously, during the first phase. This new mission was led by BEA investigator Jean-Claude Vital. He would unwittingly become one of the key figures in the AF447 mystery. On the 9th day, there was a new twist. Mike Purcell, the man behind the Remus, went to see Jean-Claude Vital.
I was having dinner, and Mike came along, and he said to me, "Jean-Claude, we have something that might be an echo." A level of trust builds up. I trusted him, and I knew that he wouldn't be calling me for no reason. All the images from the bottom of the sea are very murky, very gray. You can barely see anything. But in this picture, you could make out a shape. And we thought, we might be onto something.
On the sonar, a strange shape was clearly visible on the seabed. Seizing this glimmer of hope, Jean-Claude Vital immediately sent a Remus down to photograph the zone. But things became more difficult.
Then the weather turned. A storm blew up, conditions worsened. We couldn't bring the Remus up. We had to wait several hours until the sea calmed down to recover the robot. Once we had it on board, we had to recover the data, something like 18,000 photographs. So there we were all in the room, watching and waiting. All we could see is gray, gray and more gray. Then suddenly, bang, we could see an aircraft part. It was weird. So we wound it forward a little, and then saw more and more parts. So at that point I said, right, stop everything, I need to alert people. So that moment was...
Who did you call?
Alain Bouillard.
Jean-Claude Vital called me, I think it was Saturday morning at around 6 a.m. on April 2nd. Jean-Claude said, Alain, I think we found it. That moment was such a rush. Everybody was still in bed. My wife was sleeping. I immediately called Jean-Paul Troadec and Martine to tell them, I think we found it.
I remember arriving at the BEA. I think it was about 8 in the evening. Alan was at his desk, still looking at the photos he'd just received. And when I saw him, he said, "We've got it." So I said, "Are you sure?" He said, "Yes, I'm sure. I've got photos showing the plane's registration." So then I thought, right, so now we're moving on into another phase.
The anger of the victims' families grew when they heard that the wreckage was almost right in the center of the crash zone circle, only 12 kilometers from the aircraft's last known position. a zone that the investigators had eliminated from their search after Phase 1. Having trawled the sector with their hydrophones without any positive result, the zone had been declared clear. Still today, certain members of the victims' families are baffled by what happened. Many had said that the area around the aircraft's last known position should be prioritized in the search.
If a needle slips through my fingers, where do I look for it? Over there or here? Here, right? Why didn't they do the same with the aircraft? I've never had an explanation from the BEA on this point as to why they didn't look in the area where the plane was last seen. It's a complete mystery to me.
It's easy with the benefit of hindsight when you know where the plane came down. I'm sure some people say, they're stupid, it was right there. Why didn't they look there first? It could have been to the south, to the west, anywhere. We didn't know. The plane may even have done a U-turn and turned away from the clouds, gone through the clouds. We had no idea. Nothing.
They had no idea. But the investigators were caught up in a hunt for the pingers. It's possible that they were damaged and never transmitted any signal at all.
What happened? Why didn't we hear it? That's a whole scientific process. The evidence suggests that the pingers were not transmitting.
Rightly or wrongly, later we were proved to be wrong. We decided that the aircraft could not be in the zone scanned by the hydrophones. So we moved away and searched in other areas. We never had a case of pingers not working, so when the aircraft wasn't there, we looked somewhere else.
Alain Bouillard's job was far from over. Now he had to locate the key to the whole investigation, the flight recorders. This time, the investigators knew exactly where to look. They went to the precise spot where the wreckage had been found, the scene of the tragedy.
Every time I do a search at sea, I'm struck by the same thing. On the surface, there's absolutely nothing. The sea swallows everything, then forgets. When I was on the surface where the aircraft crashed, it was just incredible. There's nothing left. But if you go down, it's all there, waiting. It's been there for 2 years.
At the crash zone, the crew sent down the submarine robot, the Remora. This allowed the investigators to explore the wreckage site, scouring the seabed for the AF447 flight recorders. The robot is controlled by a team of technicians linked to it by a cable several kilometers long.
After you look at this, you gotta take those turns out of your cable.
Stop a minute. Zoom. Okay, now it's interesting.
Roger that. Head now.
But at a depth of 3,900 meters, the only available light is supplied by the Remora itself. Alain Bouillard knew that at this rate, locating the black boxes could take weeks.
45 meters. Thanks, 45 meters. Then let me know when you get a visual on it.
Some parts of the final stages of the search are etched in the memories of all those involved, such as this message transmitted to the research team.
Alain brought this email to me, and it was the husband of one of the flight attendants, and said, please tell all the people on the boat, the investigators, the technicians, the seamen, thank you for your efforts in this, and that he and his children prayed for us every day, which was very emotional to me, that in his grief, he is thinking of others, and that he was thinking of us and thanking us.
There's a line there. It looks like two things. There's another one there on the right.
Among the debris, the investigators discovered recognizable pieces of aircraft. Parts of the fuselage, sections of the cabin, even the co-pilot seat.
There we have two straps, one there. Up here we can't see much.
The co-pilot seat has the armrest on the right. The captain's is on the left.
Despite all the doubts, the disappointments, the exhaustion, the teams did not give up. Then the tide turned. Their tenacity finally paid off.
It might be on there.
That's it, isn't it?
Yes, we've got it. That's it.
Can someone call Alan?
That definitely looks like it. It has the label.
Where's the phone? Which phone? Call Alan. Oh, yeah.
Hello? We found one. Can you come down? Okay.
Once the flight recorder had been found, it had to be identified. Was it the FDR, the flight data recorder, or the CVR, the cockpit voice recorder? Both are obviously very important, but each plays a different role in the investigation.
PN is 617-6096-014. I'm pleased to announce we have the flight data recorder.
Good teamwork. Yeah. Great teamwork. Excellent teamwork. Thank you. Appreciate it. Comme ça. Capitaine.
Aircraft trajectory, altitude, engine parameters. This small orange cylinder potentially contains over 1,500 pieces of data about the flight. It should answer the question everybody has been asking for the last 2 years. What happened aboard the Rio-Paris flight?
No, come down. Yeah, come down, come down. Yeah, you look pretty come down, come down. Either that or shoulder that, but I just come down.
Drop it.
Money in the bank.
3 hours later, the flight recorder had been recovered from the sea. A few hours after that, investigators located the second recorder, just a dozen meters or so from the first. Faces lit up with excitement. For 2 years, the BEA, the aeronautical industry, victims' families, and the world's press had been waiting for this moment. Right in the middle of the Atlantic, the black box flight recorders had finally been recovered. The FDR, the flight data recorder, and the CVR, the cockpit voice recorder.
A recorder is only this big, and it was in the middle of the ocean. That little box will tell us a lot about the fate of 228 people.
When the wreckage was located, when the black boxes were discovered, I felt a great sense of relief and thought, at last, a calm and rational assessment of things can be made, and we can set aside all the irrationality.
It took 176 days at sea and no less than 31 million euros to find these two black boxes and maybe finally understand what caused the tragedy.
Yes, it's in pretty good condition.
It was, of course, essential to recover the flight data. But Alain Bouillard sensed that an explanation for the accident would probably come from this recorder. the one that captured the pilot's final conversations. The gendarmes immediately placed the boxes under seal. They were a vital piece of evidence in the judicial inquiry opened against Airbus and Air France for manslaughter. At this stage, Alain Bouillard remained cautious. Nothing had yet been established. If the black boxes turned out to be unusual, some pieces of debris could provide precious information. The robot thus brought several pieces of wreckage to the surface.
Okay, quick release.
We've got right and left, fast strap.
Was there a mechanical failure? An examination of the engine would reveal a great deal. At this stage, though, no theory could be discounted. But the biggest hopes were pinned on the black boxes. A French Navy patrol boat was sent out to return them to the BEA in Paris as quickly as possible.
Finding the black boxes was the first step, but a thorough examination of their contents was the crucial part. There's always a doubt with flight recorders, and here those doubts were increased by the fact that they spent 2 years underwater at a depth of over 4,000 meters.
From the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, the truth behind Flight AF447 was finally making its way to Paris. A few days later at the BEA, it was the moment of truth as the flight recorders were opened. An operation that investigators, the aeronautical industry, and the world press had been waiting for 22 months. A moment the families of the 228 victims had been fighting tirelessly for since June 1st, 2009.
So you guys will want to kind of take the puck in layers. Don't get too greedy, going too deep right off the bat. Just kind of work your way down. Just layer by layer, work your way down until you see the surface of the...
We're all struck by the odor emanating from the recorders, the smell of mud, which filled us with foreboding concerning the state of the electronic cards, which we couldn't see yet.
The BEA investigators began with the flight data recorder.
It is 6:37 p.m.
Next was the cockpit voice recorder. After many hours of drying to remove moisture, several examinations and repairs, it was time to power up the recorders. The tension was palpable. At the BEA, everyone was holding their breath.
25, 23, 21.
The verdict was in. Despite all that time spent underwater, the data on the two recorders could be accessed. The download could be launched.
The real highlight was when they told us they worked. That really was a landmark moment. It was our objective from the start. Finding the black boxes with their data intact was the culmination of a 2-year battle.
After 22 months of suspense, the truth would finally be out. Hard data was now accessible, and the flight could be analyzed, minute by minute, to reveal any potential mechanical failures. And there was a sound recording. Investigators could now hear what happened in the cockpit.
We were petrified, white as a ghost. After listening, we sat in stony silence for maybe 15 minutes, not daring to look at each other or say a word. We had just heard a live recording of the Air France 447 crash.
The families, who for 20 months had to accept the loss of their loved ones without any tangible proof of their death, were forced to create a scenario for the accident. Otherwise, they couldn't cope, couldn't accept the loss. I remember someone saying, "It's awful. Now I have to change everything in my mind." Meaning their scenario didn't necessarily match the one that investigators produced from the flight recorders. I thought that must be dreadful.
On July 5th, 2012, the BEA finally delivered its findings to the press.
Here we are, after an extraordinary investigation that has lasted over 3 years. Extraordinary, first of all, by the international scale of the disaster. Extraordinary, too, by the mystery that has surrounded the exact circumstances of this accident.
According to the BEA's final report, as is often the case, many different causes triggered the accident. A few hours after takeoff, ice crystals formed on the pitot probes, which measure flight speed. Speed indications were therefore erroneous, which disactivated the automatic pilot. At that moment, alarms went off in the cockpit. The surprised co-pilots then nosed up to an excessive degree. This triggered an aerodynamic stall, causing the aircraft to lose lift and go into a dive. In the complete darkness, the pilots couldn't see anything. They didn't understand what was happening and didn't know how to react. 4 minutes later, the aircraft hit the ocean.
Durch den Voice Recorder, also habe ich für mich zumindest.
Thanks to the cockpit recording, I realized that right to the end, the pilots didn't understand what was going on.
Bis zum Schluss ja eigentlich nicht wussten, dass sie abstürzten. Und das hat
That encourages me to believe and hope that at least the passengers didn't suffer in the cabin.
Gewissheit, dass die Insassen nicht gelitten haben.
Air France Flight 447 was all about the distress of families, and was maybe the first investigation to be in the media spotlight to such an extent. But air disasters are always shocking, a human tragedy, and this accident was all of that. We solved the technical riddle, but we didn't solve anything else. Did we enable people to understand the event? We didn't replace their husbands. We didn't replace their mothers. We didn't achieve any of that.
I went through stages of uncertainty, suspicion, and even violent criticism. I know. Because there was no result. And there was a stack of information showing that things weren't going in the right direction. But having analyzed it all, I think they did as much as they could. Mistakes were made, but they did as much as they could. So there it is. I changed my mind.